Remove her from the VIP suite. Now. The command sliced through the elegant lounge with such force that conversation stopped in mid-sentence. Crystal glasses froze halfway to waiting hands. Laughter vanished. Even the music drifting in from the stadium below suddenly seemed distant. Beyond the floor-to-ceiling glass, more than 70,000 fans counted down to kickoff beneath a sea of flashing lights. But inside one of the most exclusive suites in the stadium, every eye shifted toward a single woman standing quietly near the entrance. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change, and we are glad you are here. Now, back to Naomi Brooks. Naomi Brooks did not react. At 46 years old, she had learned that people often revealed far more about themselves than they ever revealed about her. She stood comfortably with one hand resting on the strap of a simple leather shoulder bag. Her charcoal jacket carried no luxury logo. Her dark jeans were neat but ordinary. Clean white sneakers replaced expensive heels. There were no bodyguards, no assistants, no jewelry announcing success. To everyone watching, she looked like someone who had wandered into a place reserved for people with far more money and influence. Ethan Collins had already reached that conclusion before speaking a single word. As director of VIP security, he believed reading people was part of his job. He stepped directly into Naomi's path, shoulders squared with practiced authority. "Ma'am," he announced loudly enough for nearby guests to hear. "This suite is reserved for invited VIP members." Naomi reached into her jacket pocket without hesitation and handed him a premium executive credential. "You are welcome to verify it," she said calmly. Ethan barely glanced at the card before giving a short, dismissive laugh. "We see fake credentials every season." He held it between two fingers as though touching something unclean before lowering his hand. "You are not getting in." A businessman standing nearby smirked over the rim of his champagne glass. His wife leaned closer and whispered something that made another couple quietly laugh. A teenage football fan stopped taking photographs of the field and stared toward the growing confrontation. A waiter carrying a silver tray instinctively slowed his pace. The room had begun to change. Naomi's expression remained steady. "The scanner is right there," she replied, nodding toward the security podium only a few feet away. "If the credential is invalid, you will know immediately." Ethan folded his arms instead. "I do not need a machine to tell me what I can already see." Several guests nodded in agreement. One security officer shifted closer to the entrance, while another quietly blocked the hallway leading deeper into the suite. What had started as a simple conversation was quickly becoming a public judgment. Naomi looked from one face to another. No one asked her name. No one asked why she had come. No one seemed interested in the credential she had willingly presented. Assumptions had already replaced evidence. Ethan extended his arm toward the elevator lobby. "Leave now," he ordered. "Our actual VIP guest will be arriving any minute." Naomi met his eyes with remarkable composure. "Be careful," she said softly. "The next decision you make will affect far more people than you realize." Ethan answered with a confident smile. "The only mistake today was letting you get this far." Without another word, he took the credential from her hand, slipped it into his jacket pocket, turned toward the waiting officers, and gave the order that would delay an entire stadium only minutes before kickoff. "Escort her out." Naomi Brooks did not resist as the security officers guided her a few steps away from the entrance to the VIP suite. She stopped beside a polished marble column overlooking the stadium below, where thousands of fans filled the stands with anticipation. The music, the flashing lights, and the roar of the crowd created an atmosphere of celebration. Yet only a few feet away, an entirely different story was unfolding. Ethan Collins folded his arms with quiet satisfaction. From his perspective, he had handled another routine security issue. A woman dressed too casually had attempted to enter one of the most exclusive areas in the building, and he believed experience had taught him everything he needed to know. He glanced briefly at the premium access credential still resting in his hand before slipping it into his jacket pocket without examining it further. "The VIP level isn't open to everyone," he said firmly. "Rules exist for a reason." Naomi met his eyes without raising her voice. "Rules only matter when they're applied fairly." The sentence lingered in the air. It wasn't confrontational. It wasn't emotional. It was simply spoken with the quiet confidence of someone who had spent a lifetime watching people confuse assumptions with certainty. Nearby guests gradually abandoned their conversations. A waiter carrying a silver tray slowed his pace. Two executives standing near the panoramic windows turned toward the entrance. A young couple waiting for friends paused long enough to observe the growing crowd. No one knew Naomi's name. They saw only a black woman in simple clothes surrounded by security personnel. For many, that image alone seemed to answer every question before one had even been asked. Ethan gestured toward one of the officers. "Hold her here until stadium police arrive." The younger officer looked uncertain. "Should we verify the credential first?" Ethan shook his head. "I've worked security long enough to recognize when something doesn't add up." Naomi listened carefully before speaking again. "Sometimes what doesn't add up isn't the person. It's the assumption." One of the nearby guests quietly lowered his champagne glass. Another shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. The atmosphere had begun to change. What first appeared to be a simple removal was slowly becoming something more difficult to explain. Across the hallway, a college student lifted his phone and discreetly began recording. At first, he intended to capture the excitement before kickoff. Instead, his camera focused on the calm woman standing alone while security debated what to do next. Within moments, comments from viewers began appearing across his screen. Some defended the officers. Others questioned why no one seemed interested in scanning the credential Naomi had willingly presented. Ethan noticed the phone but ignored it. His confidence remained untouched. "Everything is under control," he announced to the surrounding guests. "We'll have this resolved in a few minutes." Naomi looked beyond the glass walls toward the bright green field below. Players continued warming up, completely unaware that only a few floors above them, a single decision based on appearance was quietly setting far greater events into motion. She took a slow breath and folded her hands in front of her, her composure never wavering. Those who expected anger found only patience. Those who expected excuses heard only silence. And for the first time that afternoon, a few people in the crowd began wondering whether the woman standing so calmly might know something everyone else had failed to see. The tension outside the VIP lounge refused to fade. Instead, it spread quietly through the executive level, drawing curious eyes from every direction. Guests who had arrived expecting an afternoon of luxury and football now found themselves watching a confrontation that felt impossible to ignore. Naomi Brooks stood near the entrance with remarkable composure, her shoulders relaxed, her breathing steady, as though the noise surrounding her belonged to someone else's life. Ethan Collins interpreted that calm as surrender. To him, people who had been caught pretending usually stopped arguing once they realized security would not back down. "Let's finish this," he said, motioning toward two stadium security officers. "Escort her to the security office until stadium police arrive." One of the officers hesitated. "Should we verify the credential one more time?" Ethan answered before the question was finished. "No. I've seen enough of these fake passes over the years." Naomi looked at the officer instead of Ethan. "Would you mind scanning it properly?" she asked in a calm, respectful voice. The officer reached for the handheld scanner, but Ethan placed a hand over the device. "We're done wasting time." Several nearby guests exchanged uncertain looks. A businessman who had been quietly observing the scene folded his arms. "If security says she doesn't belong, that's probably all we need to know," he muttered. His comment earned a few approving nods, while others remained silent, clearly uncomfortable with how quickly conclusions had been reached. Across the hallway, a university student visiting the game with friends continued recording discreetly on his phone. What had started as casual footage for social media was becoming something entirely different. Comments flooded his live stream, with viewers divided between defending security and questioning why a valid-looking credential had never been checked. Inside the VIP lounge, conversations had almost completely stopped. Waitstaff carrying silver trays paused near the entrance. Bartenders glanced toward the growing crowd. Even longtime season ticket holders sensed that this was no longer a routine security dispute. Stadium police were now on their way. Ethan adjusted the radio clipped to his jacket. "Dispatch confirmed they're 2 minutes out," he announced confidently. "We'll document everything." Naomi gave a slight nod. "Documentation usually tells the truth," she replied. Eventually, Her words lingered in the silence. They weren't spoken with anger or sarcasm. They sounded more like an observation shaped by experience. One of the younger security officers shifted uneasily, beginning to wonder whether the situation had been handled too quickly. Ethan noticed the hesitation and immediately reclaimed control. "Everyone relax," he said loudly enough for the surrounding guests to hear. "This happens more often than people think." Naomi's eyes briefly moved toward the enormous stadium visible through the glass walls. Thousands of fans below laughed, cheered, and waited for kickoff, completely unaware that only a few floors above them, a single assumption had already placed an ordinary afternoon on the edge of becoming something unforgettable. She turned back toward Ethan without changing her expression. "Sometimes," she said quietly, "the smallest decisions leave the longest shadows." Before Ethan could dismiss the comment, the elevator doors at the end of the corridor opened, and the first stadium police officers stepped onto the executive level. Emily Foster's fingers hovered above the screen of her company-issued tablet, refusing to move. She knew that face, not from television, not from a magazine, but from the orientation session every executive employee was required to complete during their first month. The image had appeared for only a few seconds inside a presentation about ownership, leadership, and corporate values. At the time, it had seemed like another slide among hundreds. Now, standing only 30 feet away, the memory returned with startling clarity. Emily quietly entered a name into the internal directory. Before she could press search, Ethan Collins stepped between her and the screen. "Emily," he said with a controlled smile that barely concealed his irritation. "I need you focused on hospitality, not security." She looked up. "I just thought." "You don't get paid to think about security decisions," Ethan interrupted. "I've handled situations like this for 15 years. Emily slowly lowered the tablet, but uncertainty remained written across her face. Across the lounge, Naomi Brooks stood exactly where the officers had left her. She neither protested nor pleaded. She simply observed the room with the calm patience of someone watching a lesson unfold. That composure unsettled several guests more than any argument could have. One elderly couple exchanged uneasy glances. A young father quietly pulled his daughter closer, not because Naomi appeared dangerous, but because the tension itself had become uncomfortable. Nearby, the student who had begun recording earlier continued filming discreetly. His livestream audience climbed by the second. Comments flooded the screen faster than he could read them. Some insisted security must know what they were doing. Others questioned why a woman holding a premium credential had never been given a fair chance to explain herself. The debate spread far beyond the walls of the stadium. Ethan, however, remained convinced he had complete control. "Stadium police are on the way," he announced confidently. "We'll document everything." Naomi met his gaze. "Documentation is important," she replied evenly, "especially when everyone believes they're right." Her answer lingered in the silence that followed. One of the security officers shifted uncomfortably. He had expected anger. Instead, every word Naomi spoke seemed measured, almost deliberate. Emily took another cautious glance at her tablet, while Ethan's attention drifted toward the approaching officers. This time she completed the search. A profile immediately appeared. Her heartbeat accelerated. The photograph matched perfectly. The name beneath it left no room for doubt. Naomi Brooks, founder, chief executive officer, executive ownership committee. She blinked twice, convinced she had opened the wrong record. Then she noticed a line beneath the title indicating unrestricted executive access across every premium facility owned by the corporation. Her mouth went dry. She looked from the screen to Naomi, then back again. Everything Ethan had declared with absolute certainty was collapsing inside her mind. Emily hurried toward her department supervisor and whispered, "I think we've made a terrible mistake." The supervisor frowned. "What are you talking about?" Emily carefully turned the tablet so only she could see it. The supervisor's expression changed instantly. Confidence gave way to confusion. Confusion became concern. Neither woman spoke for several long seconds. Across the room, Ethan continued explaining the situation to the arriving stadium police with unwavering confidence, unaware that certainty built on assumptions often crumbles the fastest. Naomi noticed Emily's reaction from across the lounge, but said nothing. She simply waited. She had learned long ago that truth rarely needed to raise its voice. It only needed enough time to arrive. The arrival of the stadium police should have brought clarity. Instead, it magnified every assumption already hanging in the air. Two officers approached with measured professionalism, their eyes moving from Ethan Collins to Naomi Brooks before taking in the growing crowd surrounding the entrance to the VIP lounge. "What's the situation?" one officer asked. Ethan answered immediately, speaking with the confidence of a man who had never been publicly questioned. "Unauthorized individual. Refused multiple requests to leave a restricted area. We need her removed before kickoff." Naomi remained silent for several seconds, allowing the words to settle. Then she looked at the officer and spoke with remarkable calm. "Have you personally verified that statement?" The officer hesitated. It was a simple question, yet no one had asked it until now. Ethan stepped forward before the conversation could continue. "We've already handled the verification." Emily Foster could no longer stay quiet. "Actually, we haven't." Every head turned toward her. Her voice trembled, but she forced herself to continue. The credential wasn't fully scanned. The process was interrupted. Ethan's expression hardened. "Emily, that's enough." "No," she replied, surprising even herself. "It isn't enough." She raised the tablet in her hands. "I searched our executive directory." The room seemed to shrink. Even the background music drifting in from the stadium felt strangely distant. Emily swallowed before speaking the words that refused to remain hidden any longer. "I believe this is Naomi Brooks." Ethan laughed, but this time the sound lacked confidence. "You're telling me the CEO of one of the largest sports investment companies in the country showed up wearing jeans and sneakers?" Emily looked directly at him. "I'm telling you the photograph matches, the executive profile matches, and the unrestricted ownership credentials match." A murmur swept across the lounge. Guests who had confidently sided with Ethan only moments earlier exchanged uncertain glances. The businessman who had mocked Naomi quietly lowered his eyes. His wife folded her arms, no longer smiling. The police officer extended a respectful hand toward Emily's tablet. He studied the screen for several seconds before looking back at Naomi. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "would you mind confirming your identity?" Naomi reached into her jacket pocket and removed a simple leather card holder. From it she produced a government-issued identification card and placed it into the officer's hand without a word. The officer examined both the identification and the executive profile displayed on Emily's screen. Every detail aligned perfectly. His posture changed almost instantly. "Ms. Brooks," he said quietly, "I apologize." Ethan stared at him in disbelief. "You're seriously accepting this?" The officer looked back at Ethan. "I'm accepting verified identification." The silence that followed was heavier than any argument. Naomi accepted her identification back without triumph or satisfaction. Instead, she gazed through the enormous glass windows overlooking the brilliant green field below. For a brief moment, the cheers of 70,000 fans dissolved into a memory from decades earlier. She was 17 again, standing beside her father outside another stadium after they had been told there were no seats available, only to watch other families enter moments later. Her father had rested a reassuring hand on her shoulder and smiled despite the humiliation. "Don't spend your life trying to force open doors that small minds close," he had told her. "Build something so meaningful that one day those same doors will open because of the values you created, not because of the permission someone else gives you." The memory disappeared as quickly as it had come. Naomi returned her attention to the present, her expression composed once more. She took a slow breath, reached into her pocket, unlocked her phone, and typed a single sentence to her executive assistant. There were no dramatic speeches, no threats, and no explanation. Just 6 words that would change the next few minutes forever. Initiate executive operations protocol. Effective immediately. Naomi slipped her phone back into her jacket pocket as though she had sent nothing more important than a routine reminder. There was no dramatic expression on her face, no trace of satisfaction. Only the same composed confidence that had unsettled everyone around her since the moment she entered the VIP lounge. Ethan Collins folded his arms and shook his head. "Looks like she's calling a lawyer," he said with a smug grin. "Good luck finding one who can get you back into this suite before kickoff." A few nervous laughs echoed through the room, though they were noticeably weaker than before. Emily Foster lowered her eyes, saying nothing. She already knew the situation had moved beyond anything legal. Less than 30 seconds after Naomi's message was delivered, the first sign appeared. Every premium access gate on the executive level emitted the same sharp electronic tone. Green indicator lights turned amber, then red. Security personnel instinctively checked their badges, assuming a temporary system malfunction. Guests attempting to enter neighboring luxury suites found the doors refusing to unlock. Confused conversations spread through the hallway. One supervisor spoke urgently into his headset. "Control, we're getting access failures across the executive level." Static answered first. Then came a calm reply from Central Operations. "Stand by. Executive protocol has been activated." Ethan frowned. Executive protocol? The words meant little to most people in the room, but several veteran employees immediately exchanged uneasy glances. At the same time, deep beneath the stadium, inside the Operations Command Center, dozens of computer monitors simultaneously displayed the same priority notification. Executive Authorization Override. Level 1. All non-essential access changes were automatically frozen. Maintenance requests paused. Credential permissions locked. A series of internal verification procedures began without requiring human approval. The operations manager stared at the alert in disbelief before reaching for the secure phone reserved for ownership communications. On the field, players had already completed their final warm-ups. Television crews counted down to the live national broadcast. Referees prepared to lead both teams toward the tunnel. Then another notification reached the officiating coordinator. "Delay player entrance until further notice." The coordinator blinked twice before reading it again. Delays of this kind almost never occurred. Above the field, spectators noticed only a slight change in timing. Music continued playing. The giant screens rotated through promotional videos instead of introducing the starting lineups. Inside the VIP lounge, however, tension tightened with every passing second. Radios began speaking all at once. Section 4 Access Offline. North Elevator Authorization suspended. Executive elevators locked. Control requesting all supervisors report immediately. Ethan grabbed his radio. "Control, this is Collins." "What's happening?" A brief pause followed before the answer arrived. "Stand by for executive instructions." His confidence faltered for the first time that afternoon. Executive instructions from who? No reply came. Naomi remained exactly where she stood, watching the activity unfold without a word. She had not issued an order against any individual. She had simply activated procedures designed years earlier to protect the integrity of facilities under executive ownership whenever serious operational concerns arose. The system treated every incident the same way, regardless of who triggered it. Across the lounge, the businessman who had mocked Naomi moments earlier quietly loosened his tie. His wife glanced toward the glass overlooking the field. "Why hasn't the game started?" she whispered. Before anyone could answer, the public address announcer's voice echoed throughout the stadium. "Ladies and gentlemen, we appreciate your patience. Due to an unforeseen operational matter, today's kickoff will be slightly delayed. Please remain in your seats. Additional information will be provided shortly." A wave of confusion swept across more than 70,000 spectators. The roar of anticipation faded into thousands of overlapping conversations. Television commentators searched for explanations. Social media erupted with speculation. Inside the VIP lounge, every eye slowly returned to Naomi Brooks. She neither smiled nor celebrated. She simply met Ethan's increasingly uncertain stare with quiet composure, knowing that the truth had finally begun moving faster than the assumptions that had created this moment. The silence inside the executive lounge was broken not by shouting, but by the unmistakable sound of hurried footsteps. One after another, senior executives emerged from the private corridor connecting the operations center to the ownership suites. Their expressions carried none of the confidence that usually accompanied people in positions of authority. They were moving with urgency. Ethan Collins instinctively stepped forward, believing they had come to resolve the operational disruption. "Perfect timing," he said, forcing a smile. "We've secured the individual responsible for delaying." He never finished the sentence. The first executive walked directly past him without slowing down. Behind him came the stadium's chief operating officer, followed by the director of corporate security, the general counsel, and finally an elderly man in a navy suit whose presence alone caused several employees to straighten their posture. Every member of the management team stopped in front of Naomi Brooks. Without hesitation, the chief operating officer extended his hand. "Ms. Brooks," he said, his voice carrying genuine concern, "I sincerely apologize for what has happened today." The room froze. Ethan's confident expression vanished. He looked from one executive to another, waiting for someone to correct the misunderstanding that, in his mind, had to exist. No correction came. The director of corporate security spoke next. "We've already begun reviewing the incident. The preliminary reports are deeply troubling." Naomi accepted the handshake politely, but did not smile. "I appreciate your quick response," she replied. "What concerns me isn't that a mistake occurred. It's how many opportunities there were to prevent it, and no one chose to ask a single fair question." Her words settled over the room with quiet authority. No raised voice. No dramatic accusation. Only facts. The general counsel lowered his eyes. "You're absolutely right." Nearby guests who had watched the confrontation from the beginning now stood in complete silence. The businessman who had mocked Naomi earlier quietly picked up his untouched drink, suddenly finding it impossible to meet anyone's gaze. His wife looked visibly embarrassed, remembering every whispered assumption they had made only minutes before. Emily Foster remained near the entrance, overwhelmed by a mixture of relief and disbelief. She had never imagined that speaking up would matter, yet she now realized that a single question had changed the direction of the entire afternoon. Ethan finally found his voice. Nobody informed security that Ms. Brooks would be visiting. The excuse sounded weaker the moment it left his mouth. Naomi turned toward him with the same calm expression she had maintained since arriving. "Should respect depend on advance notice?" she asked quietly. Ethan opened his mouth, but found no answer. "If I had been an ordinary guest," Naomi continued, "would the way I was treated have been acceptable?" Again, silence. The question required no explanation because everyone in the room already knew the answer. At that exact moment, another announcement echoed through the stadium. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your continued patience. The scheduled event will begin shortly." The operations manager leaned toward the chief operating officer and whispered, "All systems are waiting for executive clearance." The executive nodded before turning respectfully back to Naomi. "Whenever you're ready, Ms. Brooks." For the first time that afternoon, several guests understood what those words truly meant. The game was not waiting for a television network. It was not waiting for the referees or the players. It was waiting for the woman who had been told only minutes earlier that she did not belong in the building. Naomi glanced through the glass at the sea of fans filling the stadium. Thousands had come to celebrate competition, teamwork, and excellence. She believed those values should begin long before the first whistle. She looked back toward the executives and gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. "Restore normal operations," she said. "But make sure today's lesson is documented as carefully as today's delay." The chief operating officer immediately spoke into his radio. "Executive authorization received. Resume all stadium operations." Across the stadium, locked systems awakened, access controls reset, and countdown clocks restarted. Yet inside the executive lounge, everyone understood that something far more important than a football game had just changed. Authority had finally revealed itself, not through intimidation, but through dignity, restraint, and the quiet certainty of truth. Applause did not begin on the field. It began inside the executive lounge, quietly at first, as one guest slowly started clapping before others joined in. Within seconds, the sound spread through the room where only moments earlier whispers and assumptions had filled the air. Outside, more than 70,000 fans remained focused on the delayed kickoff, unaware that the most important moment of the afternoon had taken place several floors above them. Across social media, short videos recorded by guests were already spreading at remarkable speed. Every clip showed the same sequence. A calm black woman presented a legitimate executive credential. A security director refused to verify it. She was ordered out of a luxury suite without evidence. The recordings ended before the corporate leadership arrived, leaving millions of viewers wondering how the story had ended. Inside the lounge, everyone already knew the answer. A senior corporate security investigator approached Ethan Collins carrying a sealed envelope and a company tablet. "Mr. Collins," he said professionally, "effective immediately, Your access credentials are suspended pending the completion of an executive investigation. Ethan stared in disbelief. This is because of one mistake. The investigator remained composed. This decision is based on verified actions, not assumptions. The words settled over the room with unmistakable weight. Minutes earlier, assumptions had guided every decision Ethan made. Now facts were determining the consequences. Without protest, he removed his security badge, master key card, and radio before placing each item into the evidence pouch offered to him. No one applauded his removal. There was no celebration, only the quiet gravity of accountability finally replacing misplaced confidence. Naomi Brooks watched without satisfaction. She had never wanted humiliation. She had wanted fairness. The businessman who had laughed at her earlier slowly walked forward, unable to hide his embarrassment. "Ms. Brooks," he said quietly, "I owe you an apology." Naomi met his eyes with calm dignity. "Thank you," she replied. "Just remember that the next person you meet deserves respect before they earn your approval." The man nodded silently, understanding that lesson would stay with him far longer than the football game. Nearby, the chief operating officer stopped beside Emily Foster. "You spoke up when it mattered," he said. Emily smiled nervously. "I almost stayed silent." The executive shook his head. "But you chose not to. Organizations become stronger because people like you refuse to ignore what they know is wrong." Down inside the stadium control center, technicians completed their review of every surveillance angle. Each recording confirmed the same conclusion. Naomi's credential had never been properly scanned. No threat had ever existed. Every escalation had been built on appearance rather than evidence. The incident was immediately designated as mandatory leadership training for future supervisors throughout the organization. Meanwhile, players waited patiently inside the tunnel, unaware that the delay had become about something far greater than football. Then the public address announcer spoke once again. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. Stadium operations will now resume." A roar swept through the stadium. Most fans believed the delay had been caused by a technical issue. Only a handful of people understood the truth. The game was not waiting for the television broadcast. It was not waiting for the officials. It was not even waiting for the players. The game waited for the woman they tried to remove. Standing before the executive leadership, Naomi offered one final thought before taking her seat. "Policies protect organizations," she said. "Character protects people. Never confuse the two." Every executive listened in complete silence. As the teams finally ran onto the field beneath the thunder of 70,000 cheering fans, Naomi looked across the stadium with quiet confidence. The final score would eventually fade into history. What would remain was a far more important victory. The reminder that the true measure of any institution is revealed not by how it welcomes the powerful, but by how it treats the person it believes has none. By the time the opening whistle finally echoed across the stadium, football had reclaimed the attention of 70,000 fans. The roar returned with every completed pass, every tackle, and every burst of excitement on the field. Yet inside the executive suite, the scoreboard no longer mattered. Guests were still talking about the quiet woman who had changed the course of the afternoon without ever raising her voice. Naomi Brooks stood beside the panoramic glass overlooking the field, watching the game begin beneath the golden afternoon light. She had never come looking for recognition. She had come expecting the same respect every guest deserved. The chief operating officer approached once more, holding a prepared media statement. "We are ready to release this immediately," he said. "It explains the operational failure and the investigation now underway." Naomi accepted the document, glanced at the first page, then handed it back unopened. "Do not make this story about me," she said calmly. "Make it about the standard every person who walks through these doors should experience." The executive nodded without hesitation. "It will be done." Emily Foster quietly stepped forward, still overwhelmed by everything she had witnessed. "Ms. Brooks," she said softly, "I almost stayed silent today." Naomi smiled for the first time that afternoon. "Courage is rarely comfortable," she replied. "It begins the moment you decide someone else's dignity is worth protecting." Emily carried those words with her, knowing they would outlast every memory of the game itself. Across the suite, Ethan Collins left the executive level beside a corporate investigator. He did not argue. He did not look back. The authority he had relied upon had disappeared the moment facts replaced assumptions. Naomi watched him leave without satisfaction. Accountability was never about humiliation. It was about making certain the next person would not face the same treatment. As the game continued below, news of the incident spread far beyond the stadium. Video clips circulated across social media. News stations replayed the confrontation. Business leaders discussed customer service. Families talked about fairness around dinner tables. Organizations began reviewing their own procedures, asking whether appearances had ever been allowed to replace evidence. What happened inside one executive lounge had become a conversation reaching far beyond a single city. When the afternoon drew to a close, Naomi quietly gathered her shoulder bag and chose a private exit instead of waiting for cameras. Before leaving, she paused for one final look across the stadium. Thousands of fans cheered beneath the bright lights, unaware of the decision that had briefly stopped everything before the first whistle. She allowed herself a quiet smile, then turned toward the hallway. No one announced her departure. No crowd followed behind her. She walked away exactly as she had arrived, without an entourage, without demanding attention, and without needing anyone to recognize her name. Long after the final score was forgotten, people would remember something far more meaningful. They would remember that an entire stadium paused because of a judgment made without evidence. They would remember that dignity had stopped the stadium before football ever began. And they would remember that real leadership is not measured by the power to stop an event, but by the character to ensure every person is treated with dignity before anyone knows who they are.